All right, welcome folks to today's presentation by our gun violence prevention group. We are the Northwest Suburbs Organizing for Action. We are an indivisible group. We cover 6 townships of the Northwest Suburbs of Illinois. We have a quite extensive organization covering basically 5,000 folks in that area. As you can see, our organizational chart actually is what we call the dual snowflake. One side is our communication and the other side is our issue teams. When you look at our communications team, you can see there's a lot going on. A few years ago, there was only 3 or 4 of those beautiful little orange groups. Today, there's 9 and there's 7 or 8 on the inside. In terms of our issue groups, we have 10 issue groups now. We've expanded by 1 over the last year. We cover everything from healthcare to immigration reform, to social justice, to women's rights, to fiscal and economic discussions. We are very heavily involved in getting more and more involved every day in the electoral process, especially locally. We work on climate change. We have a group called Restore Our Democracy, which is working very diligently, both on getting phone calls into Wisconsin and Michigan and some of the swing states, but also working hard on the redistricting problems across the country. A very aggressive group. They've also started another side group, which is combating the disinformation at school board and civic meetings. And then tonight we have our gun violence prevention group, and we'll talk about a little bit more on that in a second. And then the last group we have on the top left is Conversation Z, which is a podcast devoted to young high school and college kids. It is an amazing group. So that creates and makes up the organizational structure of NWSOFA. The secret sauce of our organization is 24 volunteers. These 24 volunteers work on the issue teams and on the communications team. Tonight, this presentation is with our gun violence prevention team. We are pleased to have Ryan Bussey here. The moderation is going to be by Sarah Knisiak. I met Sarah quite a few years ago. She is a very talented gun violence prevention advocate. She is a director of the community engagement of Newtown Action Alliance. And interesting enough, she's one of those people that does what she says. She is now a candidate for the Lake County Board, District 18. And you can see up on the screen her information. So Sarah has done an awful lot. We have seen her as she's worked with the Newtown Action Alliance. And before that, she created one of the most extensive organizations for gun violence prevention in the Chicago metro area. I believe there was like 140, 150 groups that were that had signed in because of Sarah's advocacies. And that group continues today. So Sarah, we are glad to have you on. We thank you for getting Ryan to present to the organization. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah now.
Thank you so much, Bill. Bill and I do go way back. He's one of the very first advocates I met once I got involved in gun violence prevention work. We go back at least 5 or 6 years. So I really appreciate that introduction, Bill. And thank you to NWSOFA and People for a Safer Society, 2 of my favorite, all-time favorite progressive advocacy organizations based right here in Illinois. And we're so grateful for everything that they do. I'm also incredibly grateful to my friend and colleague, Ryan Bussey. Ryan and I first became acquainted with each other in the middle of last year. And he really is who those of us in the gun violence prevention movement nationwide have been waiting for. And that is a gun owner, but not only a gun owner, he is a former insider within the firearms industry who really confirmed all of our beliefs about how and why the firearms industry and the gun lobby do the things they do and why they do the things they do. And he's here to tell us about that tonight. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background information about Ryan. First of all, I'd like to point out what he's doing right now. Right now, and since the fall of 2020, Ryan is serving as a senior advisor for Giffords. For those of you who maybe are a little bit new to the gun violence prevention movement, Gabby Giffords is a former congresswoman who I believe it was 11 years ago now, was shot in the head and survived while at a function in her role as congresswoman from the state of Arizona. She was shot in the head and survived. Several other people were killed, many more were wounded. And that her story just inspires so many of us every day. And I know I speak for Ryan when I say, you know, she's a personal hero of mine and probably for many of you. And so I'm only guessing, but I believe I can imagine that it must be a great honor for him to work for her organization. But before he worked for Giffords, Ryan was the vice president of sales for 25 years for Kimber Arms, which is one of the most well-respected firearms companies in the nation and has been for decades. And that had a lot to do with Ryan and his leadership. And I know he helped sell millions and millions and millions of guns over the course of his career. And so he is uniquely positioned to explain to us tonight how the firearms industry has radicalized America. And I'm going to leave it to him to go into detail about that. I know when I saw that is the subtitle of his book, Gunfight, My Battle Against the Industry That Radicalized America. And if you'll hold on one moment, I'm going to pause here for a second. What I'm doing now is I'm asking all of you to please look in the chat of this Zoom, because I am sharing right now in the chat. Here's the link to Ryan's book on Amazon. And you'll see if you click on it now, you'll see the subtitle is My Battle Against the Industry That Radicalized America. And when I first read the book and before I read the book, when I first read the book and its subtitle, I thought I knew what he meant when he created that subtitle, the firearms industry radicalized America. But the truth was a lot deeper and in some ways scarier than what I expected. So I really recommend the book. You can find it right there at that link that I put in the chat. And just to flesh out a little bit more why Ryan's voice in our movement is so incredibly important. He wasn't just a successful vice president of sales for one of the most well-respected firearms companies. He was recognized within the firearms industry at being incredibly good at what he did. And in fact, he was nominated repeatedly for the Firearms Industry Person of the Year Award. So to have found the courage and the determination to make such a profound change in his career, I really think that says a lot about the integrity of my friend Ryan. And I just couldn't be more pleased to introduce all of you to him here now. He's joining us now from Montana. Ryan?
Well, Sarah, incredibly kind. All of that is at least half true. I won't tell you which parts aren't true. That Sarah's really kind in her introduction. Before we go any further, I do want to note, and Bill noted, I do a lot of talking and preaching now to people to get involved, to make the world a better place. And the fact that all of you are here today, this evening, tells me that you're all involved in the same sort of thing that I preach all the time. And I'd just like to thank, Bill mentioned this, but I'd like to mention that I've worked with Sarah for a long time, as she mentioned, and I've been exceedingly impressed with her dedication and her attention to detail and her over-abiding sort of will to correct the wrongs in the world and do right. And the fact that she has, it's a tough thing to run for office. It's a tough thing to put yourself out there. It's an easy thing to talk about, and it's a tough thing to do. So I'm going to do her one better. I'm going to put her campaign website in the chat. And I encourage all of you in her district or in and around Chicago to help and volunteer and do whatever it takes to get Sarah elected. We need good people to stand up. With my campaigning out of the way, Sarah didn't know I was going to do all that, but with that out of the way, I'll roll into a bit of background about myself. First off, I remain a proud gun owner. I don't know how many guns I own. Most of the best days of my life have been spent either with my father or my brother, now with my two sons, my wife, in the field hunting or shooting. And so in no way am I the pejorative air quote thing anti-gun. I believe that owning guns is part of being an American, but I believe that with such an immense freedom comes an equally immense need for responsibility. And I believe that that balance now is completely out of whack in our country. And I saw in Bill's presentation, I saw all of the policy areas on which you folks rightfully focus. And I guess I want to tell you this evening that I disagree a little bit. The subject of my talk tonight really isn't a gun violence prevention talk. This is about saving a democracy in which all of the things that you care about, are honed and worked out in the gray areas, the hard work of coming to the middle of a democracy. And I'm worried, as is the subtitle of my book and sort of the through line of my book, my time in the industry has told me and convinced me that the politics of the NRA and the gun issue, and then the terrible spillover effects, many of which you recognize and live with in Chicago, are at the very heart of our national division. And so as I speak tonight, I'd like to say that I'm speaking to all of the issues that you all care about. And with that, maybe Christine, we could throw up the first slide. I'm going to walk you through a bit of my history, and I'm going to try to give you an accurate picture of what's going on in the country right now, how guns are interwoven into our politics and our processes. And I do want to say that you can at any time throw something in the chat or ask a question. I can go with the flow here, and I'm more than willing to take any questions you have. So 1995, I got into the industry as a young 25-year-old, feels like a 25-year-old snot-nosed kid then. And gun sales seemed pretty robust, right? They were about, at any given month, about at an average month, Americans purchased about 350,000 guns a month. And gun sales in the United States up until 2007 stayed in that 3 to 7 million units per year range. The current gun sales in the United States are between 22 and 25 million units per year. And just quick math, back of the bar napkin math, that's about a 614% increase in gun sales. And if you think back to the politics and sort of the existence in our country in 1995, that was a country where former presidents shared dinner, where people of different parties had drinks with each other after legislative meetings, where families weren't split over politics, where workplaces, weren't in a divisive morass over politics, where you didn't have "Let's Go Brandon" flags and MAGA hats and everything else meant to divide the country. And so you have a 614% increase in gun sales in the country, and you have an infinite percentage increase in national discord and hatred. And I don't think that those two figures are a coincidence. If you go on to the next slide, Christine. So part of the through line of my book, it is my memoir. It's a narrow lens on me and my family, what I experienced for those 25 years. And it's also a wide lens on the changes in our society. And I came to realize, and I think the NRA came to realize, that those sort of bullet pointed ingredients, it's almost like a recipe for the politics of the NRA. They figured out that fear, manufacturing threats to cultural touchstones, very much like the culture that I described to you early on that I'm still proud of, this idea that many of the best parts of my life are centered in and around guns, hunting or shooting with my kids, right? If you could manufacture a threat to those sorts of cultures, if you could manufacture a pressurized atmosphere where everything, even mass shootings, are used to increase the pressure, where you could build up intimidation and power And of course, guns play a big role in that because nothing changes the intimidation and power equation like a gun. If you don't believe that, just walk into a family dinner with a loaded gun and see how the intimidation changes things. If you could break apart social norms for political advantage, if you could create conspiracy theories, and believe me, QAnon is no surprise to me. I saw the formation of QAnon. I detail this in my book, but you know, I saw the NRA spout off crazy things like Barack Obama is going to rewrite the Constitution, or he's going to outlaw hunting ammunition, or like all of these crazy things, but people bought them and cheered in these big halls. And I think that was sort of the genesis of QAnon. Now, you know, there's sex slaves and pizza parlors and God knows what else, but none of that shocked me. I saw that coming for 15 years. If you could increase or manufacture hatred of the other and racism, and if you could then put that all into a big cooker and where freedom at all cost and no responsibility rule everything. That was the politics of the NRA. And then the gun industry figured out that, wait a second, those are exactly the same things that drive gun sales. And so if you look at the highest gun sale period in the history of our country, March 2020, which is where my book starts. It opens with my son being attacked by an armed man at a Black Lives Matter rally. Very, very frightening, especially for me, because I knew where that man came from and I knew what created him. From March 2020 to about January 7th of 2021, that was the most tumultuous period that any of us have ever lived through. George Floyd, COVID, lockdowns, riots, counter riots, Kyle Rittenhouse. I mean, I could just go on and on and on about the angst in our society, racism, all of it fueled by a president who wanted to fuel it all. That, if you overlay that with gun sales in America, that's the peak of the gun sales ever in the history of the country. And so that's not an accident. The same things that drove NRA, the politics and the voting patterns, irrational voting patterns desired by the NRA, also drove gun sales. And then those are also the same things. Those are very exact things that are the components or recipes for right-wing radicalization in the country. So my book is really my history and my family's history, living through that, figuring it out, participating in it, waking up to it, fighting it. I spent more than 15 years fighting against it. But I think what you need to understand is that guns in and of themselves aren't the issue or a issue. They are wrapped up because of gun companies and because of this recipe that is the same, the radicalization, gun sales, and the divisive politics of the NRA. They're part of something much larger. And so I try to explain to people, you know, some of the slides you're going to see in the next few minutes here should frighten you. They should shock you. They should, you know, they should sort of snap you to attention as to what you're dealing with. I like to, you know, Wayne Gretzky once said, and I love this quote, a good hockey player plays where the puck's going to be, not where it is. I think you all need to understand where the puck's going to be. In my estimation, the puck is headed to some very ugly places. And I want you to know how that all works with the politics. And I think the reason it's important, you're not going to be as effective at undoing this or addressing it if you're naive as to how this all happened and where we're actually going to be. So I'd like to, and I'm going to end with some points of hope, which I've experienced throughout the book and which I believe are there, but I'd like to get to the reality first. So next slide, Christine. I took this picture in April or May, I think it was April of 2012. This guy was selling these shirts at one of the largest firearms industry trade shows in the country. He was very proud of this. People were giving him high fives. Nobody was giving a second look to him. He was treated like a celebrity. And so when I say that the NRA and the firearms industry exacerbated and harnessed and used racism, it was very much like the Trump years. It wasn't the sort of march down the aisle in a white hood kind of racism. It was this kind of wink, wink, oh, racist things. I saw this all the time. It was meant to drive up pressure. It was meant to divide people. There are multiple stories about people like this in my book, but some people have in the firearms industry have recoiled when I said that racism was a part of driving of the NRA pressure game. And I kind of respond with, oh yeah, well, I have the receipts. So here's a picture like many that I snapped. This is one of the receipts that I had. And this is a very common sort of thing that you see in and around large. And this is this is not like some rinky dink garage trade show. This is a massive multi-million-dollar 100,000 person convention where people like this were walking around selling this sort of paraphernalia. If you can go on to the next slide, Christine. About the same time, the sort of breakdown of social norms by firearms companies to drive sales started to enter our lexicon. And this is the advertising campaign for the Bushmaster XM15, the gun that Adam Lanza used in Sandy Hook. And I think this is exceedingly distasteful. It leads to very dangerous things, but this launched in 2010, and frankly, it was just the beginning. But when you bought that gun, you then got this man card, which you can read there on the right. You got this man card in the mail, and you could get various sorts of paraphernalia like this. But if you see the last few words there discuss what you can do with this, how you can shove this man card in somebody's face to end all discussion. And if that sounds a lot like the precursor to these violent, Kyle Rittenhouse activities, or the sort of intimidation that we see in the Michigan Capitol or the Kentucky Capitol or the Virginia Capitol, or obviously at January 6th, where guns are front and center and intimidation is front and center, you can see it's not an accident. Those things did not just happen. Those are natural occurrences from a successful and decade-long advertising campaign. Advertising works, or companies wouldn't spend billions or trillions of dollars on it. And here's a great example of what was predicted. Obviously, 2 years after this campaign launched, that gun found its way into a grade school in Newtown. On to the next slide. About the same time, this was the sort of thing I started to see in the largest industry trade shows. This is an 80-pound helicopter gun, fires a 50 cal BMG round, which will essentially go through a vehicle at about 1.5 miles. It fires that at the rate of about 80 rounds a second. This is a young boy of about 11. What you can't see is behind me as I snap this picture walking by. His parents were clapping, and there were probably 15 or 20 people taking pictures of young kids who were up on this gun, as if it was celebrated, as if the idea that killing people at 1 mile away should be celebrated as some rite of passage. And just before I snap this picture, I tell the story in my book, but there was a young toddler of about 3 or 4 years old who was propped up on the gun by his parents, who were taking pictures and celebrating it. And so my point here is that as you see the militarization, as you see the Kyle Rittenhouses, as you see the people who want to solve things with guns in the streets, again, it's not an accident. This was all encouraged and continues to be encouraged in the firearms industry. And I believe it deeply irresponsible to sort of celebrate these things. Bear in mind that it was not always this way in the industry. When I first got in the industry in 1995, the industry, through self-imposed rules, through a decency much like the decency that was once self-imposed on our politics, would not even allow a tactical glove, a goggle, a vest, much less a gun like this, an AR-15. Anything tactical could not be displayed on trade show floors. That was as late as 2007, not all that long ago. So the industry, somewhere in the recesses of its memory, understands that decency and responsibility are very important to societal acceptance, or this whole thing might spin out of control. I'm fearful now that it is spinning out of control, because these sorts of things are a commonality. So I guess what I'm trying to explain to you is the stuff that distresses you rightfully about the aberrations in our society are not accidents. They're happening by design. On to the next slide. 2 years before that March and April of 2020 that I just described, this was a huge wall-sized poster advertisement at the SHOT Show. SHOT Show is the largest industry trade show, one of the largest top 10 trade shows in the world. There are many booths, they call them booths, but there are many booths at this trade show that are well over $1 million to $2 million. I mean, these are the size of very large homes. So it's a serious event. This advertisement was on a wall. You can see that creating Antifa, creating sort of societal angst was a way to sell guns. This is so predictive of what happened in 2020, that time, yet this was an advertisement 2 years before. In other words, this sort of societal situation was being established and advertised as a way to celebrate sort of violence in the streets and sell guns for it. Again, I want you to remember, this is an ad 2 years before the sort of angst we saw in 2020 that I described. On to the next slide. This is an ad that ran this spring. This is actually the cover of a magazine. You can see now the sort of reliance of the firearm industry on being threatened, being fearful. I will say, in all seriousness, what's with the ninja chick behind the guy? Like, to me, that's a little funny. Like, the gal is not a great looking ninja. But humor aside, it's a frightening sort of an idea that we need to manufacture threats and celebrate threats like this so we can sell more guns. Again, magazine cover that you could pick up on a grocery store, probably not all grocery stores, but you could pick up on a grocery store newsstand. On to the next slide. So the firearms trade industry trade group, the group that runs all the trade shows, that represents all the companies, almost all retailers, ammo companies, gun companies, most accessory companies, is called the National Shooting Sports Foundation, or NSSF. In one of the most ironic things in the world, NSSF is headquartered in Newtown, Connecticut, the same place that Sandy Hook happened. And just about a year, and I want you to see and note this sort of imagery that is used to provide social cover for the industry. You see what looks like maybe a father and a son competitively trap shooting, which is something I definitely celebrate. You see the picture of an elk or a deer down there in the bottom in a natural outdoor setting, which is something I certainly celebrate. But about a year and a half ago, the NSSF changed its logo. And the way it changed its logo, it didn't change any of that stuff, even though that's a relatively small part of the business now. It added those words down there at the bottom, always shooting for more. And I think that became quite illustrative and predictive addition to their logo. And I'm going to explain to you now, in the last couple of years, how the industry is shooting for more. I think they're being quite honest here. So on to the next slide. This is an actual ad. It's a website capture, but it's an advertising campaign for an AR-15 that is being sold and marketed aggressively in the industry right now. This has just happened to one I just happened to pick. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of other guns that have similar names to this. But an industry that once wouldn't allow tactical gear on its trade show floors now is advertising the Urban Super Sniper. I don't think it takes a ton of creativity to guess at what the Urban Super Sniper is supposed to be used for. My fear is that in a country that seems to be teetering on the edge of, and its democracy seems to be quite fragile, we have an entire industry now in political movement that is cheering and profiting from making it even more fragile. So when I described to you at the beginning that this is a chat, yes, about gun violence prevention, but it's really a chat about saving our democracy. I think this gun issue is woven through so many of the things you care about. I think Bill mentioned school boards, the sort of tactics that the NRA has employed for 15 or 20 years, the all or nothing politics that and conspiracy theories and just in politics of intimidation have made it into our school boards. I see it here. I live in Montana. We've had terrible occurrences of just radicalized parents and activists trying to take over school boards the same way that the NRA has tried to intimidate our politics. So I think solving and improving the problem that we're talking about here today is as important as gun violence is actually far more important than just the singular issue. On to the next slide, Christine. So these are a few of the firearms that are being sold in NSSF sanctioned retailers on websites. You have the Take America Back AR-15 in the upper left-hand corner. I don't think, again, you have to guess at what the user is supposed to do with that gun. That's a 30-round magazine there in the middle with the Biden engraving on that magazine. You can literally buy those magazines by the truckload. by the tens of thousands. Those are sold, laughed at, utilized. And again, I don't think it takes a whole lot of creativity unless you're Kid Rock, who seems to have diminished brain cell capacity. But it doesn't take a whole lot of creativity to guess at what we're trying to encourage with that sort of paraphernalia. You have another Donald Trump 1911 pistol meant to, obviously spur people into political action with their guns. Lower left corner, you have Donald Trump Jr. with the locker up, 30-round AR-15 magazine. Obviously, again, not a lot of guesses as to what we're trying to encourage there. You have the Let's Go Brandon Glock in the middle lower row there. And then my favorite, the QAnon AR-15, meant to memorialize and encourage QAnon conspiracy theories in the lower right. That's a big Q on the gun. So when I think that as you think about progressive politics, progressive issues, gun violence prevention, maybe now you see how this is all one great big morass. These aren't individual issues. The politics of radicalization aren't separated from all the things you care about, and guns aren't some tangential thing to it. Guns, the gun industry, messaging on guns, radicalization in around guns is being used to drive ever radicalizing politics. On to the next slide. And as we see norms broken in our country, in our politics, like we have certainly the last 5 years, but this is a new company that was launched this year at this industry SHOT Show about 3 months ago. Something I never thought I saw, but this is the We One Tactical Company. And you see in the logo there with the W, that's a small boy, skull and crossbones there with a pacifier. And then you have a small girl, skull and crossbones with a pacifier, each with a target over their eye. And their product is the JR-15, not the AR-15, the JR-15 as in junior 15, as in miniaturized AR-15s for young kids. My point here is that if you talk about, as we talked about Wayne Gretzky and a smart hockey player goes to where the puck is going to go, I don't think there's a limit to how ugly and how irresponsible, how far that puck might travel. And I think you need to prepare yourself for that and how intertwined in sort of the loud, boisterous, intimidating politics that you might continue to encounter. On to the next slide. So now a bit of hope. I think much like the politics on the right, the things that I have just described to you, the bad things that I've just described to you, the frightening things I've just described to you, are adhered to by a small slice of gun owners. It's very much like a radicalized congressional district where a small slice of the candidates and the activists must become ever more loud and vitriolic to get attention. The experience I've got from launching my book and telling the true story of my existence in the industry and my distress at what it may be doing to our democracy, I thought I would get trolled to death. There's a lot of stories about my family being intimidated, about me being trolled for decades. But actually the opposite has happened. Responsible gun owners who are exceedingly distressed at some of the things I've just told you and the trends that are continuing have reached out to me every day. Direct messages, letters, some just handwritten letters, some emails, like hundreds of them, maybe thousands. And so many of them have had it. This may be the jump the shark moment, but responsible gun owners are very worried about how guns are intertwined in the radicalization that is now attacking our democracy. And I guess if I could offer a point of hope here, it's to say that I believe that now is the time to reach out to gun owners and message to them in a way that you want to respect people's rights to own guns, but that this has gone way too far and the spillover effects are terrible. Obviously, you see spillover effects in Chicago every day, and those should have dismayed many gun owners years ago. But you need to meet them where they are. And I think they are now very distressed about what gun-centered radicalization is going to do to the country or how it's threatening democracy. I hear from them every day in very heartfelt, long, generational gun owners, ranch families, people who have been NRA members for their entire lives. Like, these are not, liberal, lefty, snowflake, pigtailed girls from Seattle, right? These are people who are reaching out and they're worried about this. And so I guess I'm hopeful in that way. I think that responsible gun owners, reasonable people have had enough of it. And I think it's our opportunity to reach out to them. And I think it's also incumbent on us to keep the light on the degree to which this is out of control, because we can't let this stuff be normalized. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to let Sarah or anybody else ask as many questions as you want. I'll be as frank. No, I'm not very good at not being frank. So I guess I'll just be me here, but I'll answer any of your questions, and I'll invite them from Sarah or anybody on the chat.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's absolutely chilling. I've read the book, but to hear it all laid out again just sends a shiver through my spine. And I'm sure a lot of people listening feel the same way. What I'd like to do right now is invite everyone who's listening to share any question you might have for Ryan in the chat, and he will answer as many of them as we have time for. While you're doing that, there are a couple of things I would like to say. First of all, I would like to thank all of my friends and fellow gun violence prevention advocates, not just from Illinois, but from all over the country that are joining us here tonight, and especially the survivors. Many of you are here. I see you. There are so many of you survivor advocates joining us today that I can't possibly name them all, but I want everyone who's listening to know that all of the progress we have made in recent years, and it has been considerable, is because of survivors and their willingness to stand up and tell their stories over and over again. A lot of the people in this event have known me and worked with me for years. Together, we passed 4 gun safety bills into law in 2019, and we started with the Gun Dealer Licensing Act. And what I would like to point out to those of you who may not be familiar with that bill is that it was primarily a bill. It is a law today because of our advocacy, and it is primarily beneficial to communities that are underserved because it cuts down on the illegal trafficking of firearms in Illinois, and that problem disproportionately impacts communities that are underserved, Black and Brown communities. And the reason I bring that up is because for years I have been saying what Ryan really makes a powerful case for in his book and in his presentation. Gun violence is not 5 or 6 or 7 different discrete problems. It's one extremely complex problem. We don't just have a domestic violence problem exacerbated by guns. We don't just have a suicide problem by firearm. We don't just have a school shooting problem. We don't just have a problem of violence in underserved communities. It's all connected. And what Ryan has done for me is he's given me in this beautiful book of his evidence to support what I've been saying for years. We have to care about gun violence no matter where we live. We have to care about gun violence in underserved communities because our failure to address that crisis and all of its root causes, gun violence in underserved communities, is why our country is awash in guns. If you live in a community of privilege, you have to be concerned about whether or not your child will encounter an unsecured firearm when they visit their friend's house for a play date. Because as Ryan said, in the industry's mind, they say to themselves, the industry, not Ryan, the industry says we need to celebrate threats so we can sell more guns. It is in the best interests of the gun lobby and the firearm industry when violence in Black and Brown communities is high, because they sell more guns everywhere, including in the communities that we all live in. And that's why, I just couldn't be more grateful for Ryan, and he doesn't realize what a huge service he has done to me and to all of us that work to try to end the gun violence crisis through advancing legislation and promoting other types of gun safety initiatives. Because you've backed up with real insider stories and evidence, and you've documented it, that we all have to care about all types of gun violence, and we must all work together with responsible gun owners. And in my opinion, the vast majority of gun owners are responsible. we must figure out how to work together, or we're all gonna go down together. So Ryan, I can't.
There's some questions. Yeah, there's some questions here. Thank you so much. I think maybe we'll get to all those.
Yeah.
I love this one. Okay, my favorite one so far is from Mary, because she says she's wearing pigtails. I pejoratively knocked pigtails around, but not Mary's pigtails. That was somebody else's pigtails. Or ponytails. Sorry. And she asked, why aren't more responsible gun owners speaking up? I think you should read the book to understand the degree to which there's a police state sort of thought police. It's very difficult. I don't mean to overemphasize what I've done. I just did what I thought I needed to do. But, I've sacrificed everything. Hundreds of friends that I thought were friends will never talk to me again. People who I went to their weddings or their families' funerals or their, we were close friends. Maybe we didn't see eye to eye politically, but those people, like, my entire social safety net, my social friends, such that it were, is completely gone, 25 years of it. And so that's very similar to the sort of right-wing police thought police that we see, where nobody can step out of line, even an inch, before we all got on, somebody mentioned Liz Cheney. She's far from a liberal snowflake with a ponytail, but she stepped out of line 1 inch and she's completely ostracized. And so many gun owners feel that that's the way the community operates. They don't feel like there's a place for them. And I guess to answer your question, I don't know why more aren't. I feel like they want to. They need somebody to lead them. They need somebody to speak up. And I think that's my role. And I think that's the role of everybody who encourage gun owners that who may hold some of the same values that you do, to stand up and say these things. I think it's important that we do it, because the culture that we live in now is all about loud intimidation. It's all about keeping progressive ideas, hidden and people scared to sort of espouse them. We got to open that up. There's a note here. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say there's one that's kind of relevant to what you just said. Another person asked, are responsible gun owners leaving the NRA?
I think they are leaving the NRA. I think they're becoming disenfranchised with the NRA. I think we need to figure out a place for them to land. We need to let them know that we're their advocates. They have been told for 20 years that every single person on this call wants to take every gun from them all the time, with no exceptions. And many of them have been told that in ways that they believe that. And so I've not yet met those people, but the people that want to take everything, that want to take my hunting culture away, I've not met them, but people believe that this exists. And so you have to figure out ways to respect that culture, the culture that I talked about early on, give these people a place to land. And then I think you'll be surprised at what might happen after that.
Could you elaborate a little bit on the ways we could show respect for their culture?
I think just by celebrating the good, healthy parts of what the culture is. Understanding, another thing that I tell people is, people purchase firearms now largely because they're fearful. Some of it is this cultural thing that drives my passions, but there's also a fear component. And when somebody is fearful about the safety of their family, that's not something to belittle. I'm not saying a gun is always the right answer. The data shows us that more guns in homes makes people far less safe. But telling people who are fearful about their family or about their own safety that they shouldn't feel that way, that's not the place to start it. You don't unravel fear by telling somebody not to be fearful. And so it's delicate. This sort of indoctrination happened over 2 decades. It's not going to be unwound by spouting some rational thought at somebody for 30 seconds. It ain't going to happen. It's going to take a longer, more thoughtful process than that.
So there are several questions about connecting this issue to Russia, and there's a couple about white Christian nationalism. So one person, Kathy Risberg, did a good job of kind of combining both questions into one. She says, white Christian nationalism seems to be fueled by the same strategies that the NRA is using. What do you see the connection to be between the NRA and white Christian nationalism here and also in Russia?
Well, certainly here, I believe it's very close to one and the same, very close. I think the exact same tactics that I laid out in those early bullet points are mostly the same tactics that are being used by white Christian nationalism and militia movements, which all sort of tend to meld into one. And then there's no more effective tool to increase the sort of fear and intimidation for those movements than guns, right? So guns come right in there. And for any of you who haven't read Kristen Dumais' great book, Jesus and John Wayne, I commend it to you. It's an exceptional book on this topic. And her last chapter is spent on the way guns are interwoven into Christian nationalism.
Okay. Ori Pennick asks, as a nonprofit organization, does the NRA get donations from corporate or other foundations?
I don't know of any foundations. The NRA, as Sarah will note, the NRA does get massive contributions from corporations. I was never aware of, and I never, I'm not on the inside enough to know the exact books, the money flow of the NRA. I was on the fringes of it. I saw it flowing in. So, I note stories in the books of individuals contributing $1 million or $500,000 to the NRA. And then obviously the individuals contributed the small dollar amounts. And then it's been asserted with some veracity, I think, that there are some foreign actors, including some Russian actors, that had some sort of influence, perhaps monetary, on the inner workings in the NRA. I did see a lot of Russians. I saw Maria Butina, who was a convicted Russian spy. I saw her at the NRA show. It wasn't uncommon. That sort of coziness with Russia at the NRA predated the coziness with Russia and the Trump administration by about 2 or 3 years, which goes right along with the themes of my book, right? If you want to understand what was going to happen to right-wing radicalization in the White House and the Trump administration, just roll back the clock about 5 or 6 years, look at what was going on in the firearms industry, and that's what happened. That exact thing is what happened in our country.
So we have a couple of questions about safe gun storage. One person is asking, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble finding it right now. I want to give the person credit for the question. But one person is specific. Joyce Slavic asks, how do you suggest we reach out to, oh no, I'm sorry, wrong one. 2 people have asked about safe storage and how we can reach out to gun owners and ask them to work with us to try to promote safe storage. I'll give a little background information there. There's currently a federal safe storage law pending before the House. It's very close to, it has all the votes it needs to pass. It just hasn't been called for a vote yet. And what we know that the majority of gun owners are in favor of storing guns and keeping them away from kids. So one of the questions in the chat was, how do we get gun owners involved in the effort to promote safe storage? So that, because we're so close to getting a federal law, and I know there are efforts underway in many states to pass safe storage laws, including in Illinois, where most of our participants are from today. Do you have any suggestions, Ryan, about what could we do to draw gun owners into our effort to promote safe storage and pass legislation that mandates it?
Yeah, so one effective thing that I think everybody on this call should consider is use the language of what used to feel like the right. I don't even know what the right is anymore, but this sort of idea that decency and responsibility and democracy are important. Those are all words that the right tried to co-opt for the last 25 years, right? But something that I have found is very effective and on safe storage and then on everything else is if you focus on the need for people to be responsible. That's not some touchy-feely liberal idea. That's always been stalwart kind of conservative idea. And those sorts of words and terminology and phrases really resonate with gun owners because gun owners have been told that they're going to be the responsible ones. They're the ones that care about democracy. So I like to think that I'm kind of getting to the right of gun owners by saying, well, I care about the democracy so much. I care about guns more than you do, right? I care about being responsible enough in and around gun policy so that we can save the democracy, so that we all have rights. Because if this thing goes down in a totalitarian ball of flames, like ain't no right gonna matter, especially not the Second Amendment. So you're almost caring more about the things that they say they care about than they are. And that really stops people. That's a language of commonality. And I think that works on safe storage, right? Because responsibility in and around safe storage is really important. That's really all safe storage is. It's responsible behavior. You don't want somebody who shouldn't get a hold of the gun to get a hold of the gun. That's it. It's being responsible. And if you frame it in responsibility, to me, that helps a lot.
So to go a little more narrowly focused on that topic, 2 people asked questions about how they would like to see their school districts distribute information about safe storage of firearms. And one person specifically said, do you foresee much backlash from gun owners if schools were to start providing secure storage information? That's from Mary Jane Wang.
I think it varies by locality, but again, I think it's hard for gun owners to argue with encouraging responsible behavior. And so, to me, that's where I start. I start with this big picture of who's gonna argue with being responsible. And so, I would almost say we're gonna talk about responsible gun ownership, and under that is going to come safe storage. I guess I would encourage everybody to think of those sort of big connecting values. A political mentor of mine, hero of mine here, likes to say that values unite and issues divide. And so I think focusing on these values where everybody agrees, like who doesn't want to be responsible, right? That's a value. Focus on that as the way to drive your policy, and the issues will follow that.
Oh, I hope you're right. That's excellent advice. I think we have time for one more question. Karen Hine asks, universal background checks have a widespread approval among Americans, but why can't these laws pass Congress? Does the NRA have such a huge influence over Congress?
Yes. It's not so much the NRA does anymore, because I think, we've all seen the news. The NRA is not having its best day. But much like you could say Trump doesn't have direct influence over the government anymore, but Trumpism does, right? The Trumpism hasn't gone away, and neither has NRA-ism. The all or nothing politics that I described have not gone away. And so that's what we're talking about breaking down now. If you think of the gun industry again as this radicalized congressional district, it's going to keep getting ever more radical, and that's going to leave responsible people out here in the open, and we're going to have to figure out a way to bring them in. Now, as far as why background checks don't pass, it's because people are in favor of background checks, but I don't think they ever get framed and presented in the right way. And I think I go back to this now. We should push on background checks as a way to keep radicals who want to overturn our democracy from getting guns, to keep domestic terrorists from getting guns. In other words, whatever we've been doing hasn't been working for 18 years, because background checks been pulling at 72 to 92% for 20 years, and they haven't passed. And so why is that? Well, it's because something we've been doing hasn't been working. I think there's an opportunity now to do something different, and that is unite against radicals who want to overturn the democracy. The Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, all of these groups that were very evident in the lead up to January 6th and then at January 6th, all have guns at the very center of them. They're all centered around gun radicalization. And so, positioning background checks against that class of domestic terrorists, I think, is a good way to maybe move the ball forward a little bit.
I know there are a lot of advocates in this meeting right now listening who will find that very helpful. And everything that you've said tonight has just been incredibly moving and thought-provoking. And I, for one, just want to do more, right?
So there's a saying in, Sarah, there's a saying in elk hunting, and I do a lot of elk hunting. I wish I did more of it, but you have to hunt the elk where they are, not where you want them to be. Mm-hmm. And I think that so oftentimes progressives, of which I consider myself one, make the mistake of demanding that we hunt where we want the elk to be, not where they actually are. And I a lot of people have said, and I think rightfully so, if Sandy Hook didn't spur change, then what will? Like we wanted these people to be exasperated about Sandy Hook or about Parkland or about Las Vegas or Sutherland Springs. I could go on and on, but these singular bad actor events, for some reason, can be explained away by gun owners or people who are center right. What they can't explain away is guns at the center of an entirely, consumptive radicalization of the country. And so perhaps we should just say, okay, the elk aren't over here, they're here, let's go here. And I guess that's kind of what I'm proposing is find a place where we can get traction.
Well, there are a lot of extremely experienced and effective grassroots advocates in this meeting right now. And the first rule of grassroots advocacy is meet people where they're at.
Yeah.
So, just to underscore that extremely important and valid point that you just made there. We are good at meeting other advocates for gun violence prevention where they're at. Let's focus on meeting responsible gun owners where they're at, as Ryan suggested.
I might answer this one from Bill. He's talking about an auto sear, and I'll hit this auto sear thing, but I think you should also, I'm sure many of you know what a ghost gun is. A ghost gun is a gun that essentially is finished by, it's not quite a complete gun. You get the parts, rudimentary manufacturing process, a few holes drilled, and you can turn the gun into a gun, and it does not have a serial number. Those are becoming a huge problem. And Bill mentions sear modification, which turns a gun into a fully auto gun. There are various products which the bump stock didn't actually operate on the sear, but you're going to see more and more ghost gun sort of behavior, which is on the fringe, which a gun without a serial number 5 years ago, people would have thought that's crazy talk. That'll never happen. Now there's millions of them being made. They're not even recorded in the official statistics. So when I say 22 to 25 million guns being sold, that doesn't include ghost guns because ghost guns aren't reported because there's no serial number on them. BATF doesn't know how many of them are being made. That's a fringe thing. You're going to see more modification of sears and conversion into fully auto guns too. So I think you should, and responsible gun owners are not okay with this. These are things that I did not think was going to happen. I mean, I'm pretty jaundiced. I wrote a book about this, and this is exceeding my expectations in a negative way. So I think you should be prepared for it.
I think we should too. I can't thank you enough, Ryan, and everyone who listened in. I'm going in just a moment, I'm going to hand this over to Bill to finish up for us. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. I just want to direct everyone to the chat once more. If you kind of scroll to the last few messages in the chat, you will see I shared a second time the link to Ryan's book. If any of you joined after we started, you might not have been able to see it when I shared it at the beginning of the hour. So you'll see a link to Ryan's book there on Amazon. I've read it. I recommend it to everyone. Makes a great gift. Please check it out. I also reshared Chuck Nozicka's link about the Gun Safety Consortium and Do Not Stand Idly By, which are both organizations are doing great work on safe storage. So I invite everybody to check that out. Ryan, it's been such a pleasure. NWSOFA and People for a Safer Society, I just can't thank you enough for having Ryan and I join you tonight. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye to all of my friends and hand it over to Bill to sign us off.
Thank you, everybody.
Brian, I just wanted to say to you that I mentioned earlier that I was a farm boy, a very small farm, but my brother and myself and my dad, what was fun when we were young was to go out with our 22s and our 410s and go hunting. I honestly don't think I ever got anything except maybe some posts, fence posts, but it was a great bonding experience, and it's one that we love. And I think if we can take anything away from this is we really need to take ourselves a little bit closer to where gun owners and us can talk about these issues where the militarization of the country is happening that nobody wants. And I think that is just great. We really thank you so much for being on. Sarah, just amazing to have you on from Boston as you're traveling. I wanted to say to everybody here, if you want to find more information about what was said, this is the NWSOFA, Northwest Suburbs Organizing for Action.org website. And you'll notice that on our tweets right here, we have gunfight right at the top. But you can go to this first tab up in the top. It's called calendar. And I think Ryan really pointed something out. I will take that one more step. all these social issues are interconnected. They are intertwined, and unfortunately, those that are creating the QAnon or the great conspiracies seem to be finding their way into every social issue. And we have some great champions. I'm not just talking about NWSOFA, I'm talking about Indivisible and their 6,000 chapters across the country, and especially the tremendous work done in Illinois here by Indivisible Illinois. And I think Rosemary is on today. Rose, it was just great to see you. But we're trying to combat this, and we're trying to combat it at all levels. And raising awareness is job one. Ryan, I know you've gotten a lot of awards, but I can tell you, you get an award for raising awareness. I took a lot of screenshots of those photos that you had there.
Well, don't dwell on those all night. Those will scare you, but I'm glad I could help.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And with that, a shout out to Kathy Reedsberg and to Natalie Warren for doing the dirty work of putting things together, working with Sarah, trying to get all of us on the same page as to what day, what time, what we're going to do. It's not easy, but if you got a lot of folks to work with you and support your efforts, it gets a little easier. So thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Natalie and Sarah. A big shout out to you. And Ryan, you rock.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ryan, so much. Thank you,
you.
Sarah. This was fabulous. Really appreciated you being here,
My
and
pleasure.
everyone for coming.